Garp does not like to talk about what happened at God Valley. The reason Sengoku gives for Garp's silence is that he on God Valley had to ally with pirates to protect the celestial dragons, but now that we've seen the truth of what happened that day, this is very likely a false story. A story that was not only created by the world government, but a story that they planted into Garp's mind after the incident. The reason why the government did this is because they could not allow Garp to remember that 38 years ago at God Valley, the hero of the Marines turned on the world government and fought against Imu. God Valley may have never been an incident about Roger and Garp teaming up to fight rocks, but what it really was everyone banding together to fight Imu. Even though Garp only came to God Valley to fight pirates, the latest chapter shows that he was not blind. Garp immediately saw that things were not right on this island, and that the celestial dragons had been mass murdering this country's civilians before the start of the incident. Garp at this moment can scarcely believe that the rumors about the native hunting competitions are actually true, but this does not just make him question his own sense of justice, but Garp even thinks that what he's seeing has to be a dream. This, however, is likely only the beginning of the crazy stuff Garp is about to see on this island, as in this same chapter, Imu personally comes down on God Valley, with Rox, Roger and Garp all sensing his arrival. After seeing what he has seen, it is incredibly hard to believe that Garp in this situation would choose to fight on Imu's side, and where the story is more than likely going is Garp teaming up with both Roger and Rox to fight the greater evil. Yet, there is a problem with this idea. The One Piece story simply would not make sense if this is actually what happened at God Valley. This is because we know for a fact that Garp stayed with the Marines even after the incident, with the public story being that Garp was the hero who defeated the Rocks pirates on this day. If the truth, however, is that Garp fought Imu, there is essentially no way the government would have let this slide and kept Garp around after he'd betrayed them. It would, however, make even less sense for Garp himself to stay with the Navy at this point, as he had already made the gigantic leap of turning on the celestial dragons, which Garp should know would mean that his life becomes forfeit. Yet, there is one way the story could still make sense, where Garp did actually team up with Roger and Rox to fight Imu. This would be if Garp simply did not remember what he had done. I am, however, not talking about Garp getting random amnesia from a lucky strike to the head, but about the government literally altering Garp's memories. I recently brought this up in another video, but there is a devil fruit in the story that is able to do exactly this, and this would be the memory fruit. This devil fruit was introduced back in Whole Cake Island, but Pudding was very likely not its first user. The God Valley incident happened decades before Pudding was born, which could well mean that the fruit belonged to another user at this point in time, a user that could well have been working for the world government. We know the government is always looking for the most special devil fruits in the world, where they, for example, were willing to pay as much for the Ope Ope no Mi as they were for Whitebeard's bounty, and they had also spent centuries searching for the Nika fruit. The memory fruit has a strong case as being one of these fruits the world government is desperate to get their hands on, as the government's MO has always been the twisting of information to manipulate events, be it something as simple as blackmail or something as drastic as wiping out entire nations from the map. Because this fruit allows its user to actually manipulate memories, the government could in theory use it to purge unwanted information from people's very minds. Or, alternatively, they could even use it to add false memories in place of real ones. While this could be a bit too speculative, I also think it would make a lot of sense for the government to grant this power to one of the God's Knights. The Celestial Dragons have been repeatedly noted to be devil fruit collectors, but this is not just as treasure, but also as tools, where the God's Knights have shown themselves to be some of the most skilled devil fruit users we've ever seen in the story. The Knights are also the force the government uses for their most dirty operations, like we have now seen on both Elbaf and God Valley, but this is also reflected in their devil fruit powers. Gillingham's devil fruit, as an example, is not just oriented around combat, but is also pretty much tailor-made for subterfuge. There are actually still a few God's Knights on God Valley whose devil fruits have not yet been revealed, and while this is something I have very little evidence for, just to entertain the idea, what if the previous user of Pudding's fruit was actually on this island, and what if this one thing could explain the entire mystery of Garp's character? While this may still be a wild theory, Something strange had to happen on God Valley, where it's not just Garp, but several other characters who took part in the incident seemingly do not remember everything that happened. We see in this latest chapter that Dragon was still on the island by the time of Imu's arrival, yet he in present time makes it clear that Sapo's reverie story was the first time he'd learned of Imu's existence. This chapter also ends with Whitebeard and Kaido getting ready to face off against Imu, but these two having personally fought Imu would actually make very little sense. This is because both Whitebeard and Kaido later came to believe themselves to be the strongest people alive, and I do not think this would just be empty bravado. Whitebeard is in truth very humble about his strength, whereas Kaido was actually always looking for an opponent stronger than him. What if the explanation for all these questions, however, would simply be that none of these characters actually possessed their memories from God Valley? The way the memory fruit was shown to work in Whole Cake is that it takes a hold of a person's memories and allows the user to edit them like a film reel. Pudding has also shown that the fruit can be used on a lot of individuals at once, where she during Whole Cake has a scene where she manipulates the memories of dozens of different homies at the same time. If another character had this fruit, and if they had actually managed to awaken its powers, it is not impossible that they could do something as crazy as simultaneously manipulating the memories of even the ridiculously strong characters who were at God Valley. This is how Devil Fruit Awakenings have been shown to work, where they can seemingly affect even the strongest Haki users. While this theory may still sound far-fetched, Garp's actions after God Valley are just genuinely bizarre. It's not only that Garp chose to stick by the world government, but Garp after the incident even kept his firm belief that the Marines were a force for good. Garp was so set on this idea that he still after God Valley wanted all of his foster children to become Marines who would serve the government. And Garp was absolutely livid when he learned that Dragon quit the Marines and became a criminal who wanted to topple the government. There is also another interesting hint that Garp's memory could have been manipulated, which is the last interaction Garp had with Roger. Roger in this scene is so convinced that Garp is a good person that he has no reservations in trusting Ace to him. Even Garp is baffled by Roger's trust, saying that he's talking nonsense. Yet Roger is still certain that Garp will do the right thing. It could however be that the reason for Roger's trust was that he knew Garp better than Garp even knew himself. If Roger at God Valley had seen that when the chips were down, Garp was willing to betray the government and to do the right thing, he could rest easy, knowing that Garp would protect Ace. Naturally, if the government did tinker with Garp's memories after the God Valley incident, none of the other survivors like Roger could have ever revealed him the truth. They technically could have, but all of the survivors were pirates, and because Garp tends to charge at his foes like a raging bull, they really might not have ever had the chance to tell him the truth. I might however be getting ahead of myself with this video. Would any of this actually make any sense? Would the world government actually go through all of this trouble for a traitor like Garp, who, if this video is correct, did the cardinal sin of rising against Imu himself? I honestly think they would. Say what you will about the world government, but they hold Garp in incredibly high regard. The government so far in the story has essentially let Garp get away with everything, whether it's disrespecting the celestial dragons, raising some of the most dangerous criminals in the world, or him refusing to become an admiral. The government doesn't keep Garp around out of the goodness of their hearts, but the story verbatim notes that they do it because of Garp's accomplishments. Even the elders have shown that they have immense respect for Garp, where Saturn after the Summit War says that he thinks it is no surprise that Luffy has gotten as far as he has, because he is Garp's grandson. The truth is that Garp is just someone incredibly useful for the world government to have on their side. He is not only one of the strongest people who's ever lived, whom the government can deploy against even their greatest enemies, but much more importantly, Garp is a living legend who inspires both Marines and civilians worldwide, symbolizing the Navy's power and righteousness. This is something the world government cares very deeply about, where they treat the Navy as the just public face of the government, a story that they can sell to the masses about the benevolent government protecting the world from evil pirates. Even if Garp did something completely bonkers, like fighting against Imu, there's a lot of reasons for the government to still want to keep him on their side. This is also basically how they've operated throughout the series. Even after everything he did in the pre-time skip, the government still kept Kuma around, as they believed that Kuma's mind was fully pacified after what Vegapunk did to him. The warlord system is also in essence a system of the government giving people with questionable loyalties second chances in exchange for military power. If the government had managed to alter Garp's mind after God Valley and fed him the censored version of events where he fought the Rocks pirates with Roger, Garp would have likely just kept being the kind of marine we've known throughout the story. He tolerates the celestial dragons, yet never completely turns on them, as Garp simply sees the Navy as being too important for the world, and is yet unaware of the true evil the government is hiding. I mentioned this earlier, but Garp also has a few ominous lines of dialogue in this chapter about already thinking that what he's seeing on God Valley is a dream. This could well be foreshadowing that this is how Garp remembers the event, where he doesn't talk about it because he only has hazy memories of this day, and to him, it all might as well have been a dream. Still, I gotta say, this is one of those theories I just do not really see panning out to be true. It could be cool if Imu had his own Men in Black checking the witnesses after God Valley, but I also have huge issues with this theory. Number 1 is Haki. Even though Devil Fruit Awakenings can somewhat bypass Haki, the vice versa is also true, where we know that strong enough Haki can cancel out Devil Fruit powers. As Garp is basically one of One Piece's Haki gods, even if the government had an agent with the memory Devil Fruit on the scene, which in itself is a pretty big assumption, it is a pretty hard pill to swallow that they could get through Garp's Haki to tinker with his mind. Pudding was able to use this fruit on Sanji, but I honestly think this scene has nothing to do with Haki, as Sanji was likely not using his Haki in Pudding's presence. Another point is that I also extended this theory to include characters other than Garp, such as Kaido and Whitebeard, but it might even make less sense for these characters to have had their minds tinkered with. This is because Kaido seemingly does still possess some memories of what happened at God Valley, where he, for example, clearly remembers eating the dragon fruit. I suppose the government hypothetically could have left this inconsequential memory intact, but it just makes the idea harder to believe. I do, however, have a twist for you. There is actually a much more interesting way the events of God Valley could have played out, where the reason why Garp may not remember what happened could very well still be that his mind was being played with, yet not by some random world government character, but by Imu himself. It is possible that the reason why Garp and Roger teamed up against Rocks was that this was a decision that was forced on them, where Imu on God Valley could have turned both Garp and Roger into his personal demons. This is an idea I heard in one of the comment chains on my channel, and it is honestly one of my favorite One Piece theories that I've ever heard. I actually like it so much that I'm currently making an independent video about it, where if the video is already uploaded, you can click here to watch it, but if not, just wait a few days, because I'm trying to get it out as soon as possible. I really can't thank these commenters enough for the idea. It's to me way more interesting than this video's idea about the memory fruit, but I also feel like any alternative the manga might go with would be super boring in comparison to Imu flipping the script and using Domi Reversi on Garp and Roger. This chapter interestingly revealed that Imu is not actually the only character able to perform Domi Reversi, as Carling and or his female God's Knight companion also use the ability on the Davy clan. Imu's powers are, at least to me, getting more and more confusing by the chapter. Even though One Piece characters are pretty much always neglecting their most useful abilities, if characters other than Imu are able to use Domi Reversi, the fact that we never saw the Elders or the God's Knights using it on Egghead or Elbaf is to me extremely questionable. An obvious example of when they could have used it is when the God's Knights kidnapped Elbaf's children, where Domi Reversi would surely have been a more effective way of doing this than the roundabout Devil Fruit plan the Knights actually went with. It is possible that Domi Reversi could be a special power Imu only granted to Carling, where he 38 years ago could have already been grooming Carling as a future warrior god. This idea wouldn't, however, be without its own confusion, as Carling clearly wasn't that special to Imu, as he did not give him the same longevity he gave to the Elders and to Kunko. There is, however, an even bigger thing we learned about Imu's powers in this chapter, which is that he is able to possess Saturn. This appears to be a much more potent possession than the one Imu did on Kunko, as Imu is not just taking over Saturn's body, but is seemingly manifesting himself on God Valley in his original black form. If Imu is able to do something like this, I do once again have to ask why he did not possess any of the Elders on Egghead Island. If there ever was an event that was go time for the world government, it definitely was the Egghead incident, where they had mere minutes to stop Vegapunk's broadcast from going out. Granted, Imu not possessing Saturn or the other elders here is just the tip of the iceberg. If you ask me, frankly, Saturn shouldn't have stopped at the elders, or even at getting possessed by Imu, but he on Egghead should have basically summoned all of the gods' knights, and whatever other military force he could have gotten his hands on, to stop Vegapunk. I'm not necessarily saying there is no explanation for why the government didn't go all out like this on Egghead, as we still have such a loose understanding of how Imu's powers actually work. But this is definitely something I think the story needs to address at some point. I doubt it will though, since the number one rule that serves as the axis the entire One Piece plot revolves around is that the world government is just that incompetent. It's pretty interesting that Imu of all times decided to appear during the God Valley incident. I think the reason here is however pretty simple, which is that Imu very likely just wanted to eliminate Xebec at any cost. At this point in the timeline, Xebec is not only the king of the era, but he could very well also be the only living outsider who has seen Imu, and we already know what Imu likes to do to these kind of people from the present timeline. This flashback has several times alluded to Xebec in his time being the government's number one target. They apparently placed a huge bounty on his head, offered Harald world government membership if he killed Xebec, and even in this chapter, the thing the other elders contact Saturn about is if Xebec had been eliminated. It really would not surprise me if Xebec actually had an only death bounty on his head, since the government is seemingly pulling all the stops to kill him. I also think Saturn telling the elders that Xebec was still alive was also the likely impetus for Imu personally coming to the scene to kill him. If the reason for Imu wanting Xebec dead so bad is because he saw him in the Holy Land though, I have to point out that Imu showing himself to even more people on God Valley is a bit of a counterproductive way of solving the problem. Now that I think about it, the same point I used for Saturn not summoning more forces to Egghead arguably applies here, where I really see no reason why Saturn wouldn't summon the other elders to God Valley. This could in theory still happen, I suppose, but if it doesn't, it makes me wonder if the manga might have opened Pandora's box by introducing teleportation to the story. As far as other works of fiction go, teleportation does tend to lead to exactly this problem, where the characters who have the ability do not often use it when they should. Though I guess I already mentioned earlier in this video that One Piece characters already have this problem of rarely using their most appropriate abilities, so I suppose this is really nothing new. This scene of Xebec with Whitebeard and Kaido preparing to fight Imu is just metal. Xebec has really surpassed all of my expectations, and he honestly is one of the most badass characters in this story. Even though he just had to fight Carling and his group, Xebec doesn't even flinch at having to face off against Imu. Unlike the other characters here, Xebec is also the only one who actually has some idea of how insanely powerful Imu is, from their prior encounter during the reverie. As if this wasn't cool enough though, Xebec then tells Whitebeard that there really is no point in him getting involved, meaning that he's ready to face off against Imu even without any help. I had in a prior video said that Whitebeard was likely to stick by Xebec to the bitter end, because Whitebeard tends to follow the pirate code, and while this may be his true reason, I honestly like the reason Whitebeard gave here even more, where he's just doing this to pay back his bar tab. I think this is a pretty funny note to something Marco said about Whitebeard years ago, where Whitebeard apparently also drank in the tab of the other Whitebeard pirates. This wasn't because Whitebeard was just cheap, but because he always sent his own share of the loot back to support his home island. Based on this interaction with Xebec, this is probably also what he was doing back when he was with the Rocks pirates. There's a lot of One Piece characters that I love, like Garp, Katakuri, and most recently Xebec, but Whitebeard has this sneaky habit of finding ways to remind me, while he'll probably always be my favorite. This face-off between the Rocks pirates and Imu also highlights something that I think One Piece is really good at showing, which is the idea that you find your true comrades on the battlefield. We at this point know that Whitebeard, Kaido and Xebec don't always get along, to say the least, but this scene really shows that when things get tough, they've got each other's backs. If the story we've been told of God Valley really is completely false, it could also very well be that Roger and Garp will join this unlikely band of allies. However, now that I've heard it, I can't get the idea of God Valley actually being a story of Demon Roger and Demon Garp versus the Rocks pirates out of my mind. It's just infinitely more interesting to me than something like all the characters here teaming up against Imu. But I really just have to reserve my thoughts for that other video. What in this chapter possibly made the idea of Xebec being the one Imu would use Tomi Reversi on happening less likely is that Xebec here has to date the best feats of combating Imu's powers. Garling says that it took really long for him to recover from Xebec's attacks, and Xebec later left Garling a complete wreck at the end of their fight. We already got hints of this in the fight between Sommers and Gaban, but I think this implies that these immortal characters work a lot like the homunculi in Fullmetal Alchemist, where you just have to beat them enough times for their regeneration to reach its limit. However, the only way to apparently do this in One Piece is with Conqueror's Haki, which I honestly think might be a net negative for the story. In practice, this would just mean that these celestial dragons have a special visual effect whenever they take damage, and that they are immune to non-Conqueror's attacks. But I really don't like this second part. It essentially would continue the trend of Conqueror's Haki being the answer to all the problems in the series, which in turn just makes non-Conqueror's characters increasingly irrelevant. I personally just hate this. I think the best way I can put this is that I really do not want to live in a world where Kizaru loses to someone like James Sommers, just because Kizaru was born under the wrong star and doesn't have Conqueror's Haki. And I really don't think the alternative of every single top tier being revealed as a Conqueror's user is that good either, and that it would honestly just make the One Piece world less interesting. If I ever got the chance to give direct feedback to Oda about this story, the way Conqueror's Haki is being handled would definitely be right at the top of my list. The aftermath of Xebec's fight with the Gods Knights implies that he actually had to put down his own father and grandmother, which is honestly really sad, and would explain why he's so enraged at the end of this fight. I really hope Teach is somehow aware of the events that transpired on God Valley. It really would add so much weight to why he wants to tear down the government, which is seemingly the storyline we will see play out sooner rather than later in the final saga. I also gotta give Teach's mom some credit, where Eris actually knows how to put Xebec in his place, and she even sees herself as a part of the Davy clan, even though it's only by marriage. Eris's line about being treated well on God Valley before the native hunting competition actually made me wonder if she might have been friends with Shanks' mom, as the two were mothers of young children at the same time. This chapter already gives so much onus to how important Shanks and Blackbeard are set up to be in the future of this story, with them even getting these side-by-side panels of being escorted off the island. The manga is basically going downright biblical with how it's writing the origin stories of these two characters, and there's really no doubt in my mind that Shanks and Blackbeard are set up to be the most important non-Straw Hat characters in the endgame, way more important than even Imu. Eris was pretty brutal when she said that she's even willing to kill Teach over handing him to the government. We also learned that Eris was a pirate before coming to this island, which I think explains her mindset, since she's probably very aware of what the celestial dragons do to undesirable subjects like Teach if they got their hands on him. Essentially, death would be the least of what Teach might have to go through. Eris also says that she wants to reunite with Xebec on Lulusia, which is super interesting. Blackbeard's Vivre card says that he was born on the Grand Line, in a harbor called Shade Port. Considering that Lulusia is also on the Grand Line, I wouldn't be surprised if it actually is Eris's home island. I certainly can't think of another reason why she'd want to cross half the world from the West Blue to the Grand Line for a simple reunion, unless she had some kind of connection to Lulusia. I'd assume this is also set up to add even more strife between Blackbeard and Imu. As if Imu causing the death of his entire clan and family wasn't enough, Imu could have also coincidentally nuked Teach's birth land. I never would have thought that Blackbeard would end up being the Sasuke of One Piece, but here we are. Lulusia Kingdom being Blackbeard's birthland could also explain something we saw in the Reverie arc, where the Blackbeard pirates actually tried to conquer this island. I suppose it makes sense that Teach would want the island where he was born as a territory, though sending a mook like Pinkbeard on this mission was a bit of a failure. Gaban and the Roger pirates getting the Celestial Dragon's loot is something that connects to a thing I mentioned in another Navigating One Piece video, where Volume 4 Billion showed that Roger's crew escaped God Valley with a bunch of treasure, and that they actually found Shanks among this loot. Gaban's words about finding devil fruits, however, really made the gears in my head turn. While it was my first thought, I do not think this is where the Roger pirates found Buggy's fruit, as the crew had apparently just got it during the events of Buggy's flashback years later. There is however a very interesting detail about all the loot Roger gathered during his career as a pirate, which is that he literally gave all of it to Whitebeard, as thanks for him lending him Odin. So, here is a simple theory. What if one of the Whitebeard pirates' fruits was originally on God Valley and was years later given to them by Roger? We know this couldn't be Marco's fruit, since he was shown using it during the early parts of the Odin flashback, but this could for example be the origin story of Josu's fruit. At least to me, the diamond fruit would definitely fit alongside the rest of the special devil fruits the celestial dragons possess. Oh yeah, this chapter also showed a scene of a Marco doppelganger on God Valley, but there's no way that this is actually him. The character in this scene is a grown man, whereas Marco at this point in the timeline should be just a kid. The resemblance between the two is however uncanny, and even the kick this guy performs is 100% Marco. This is also apparently a really strong character, as he is able to beat back someone as strong as Kyo, who was said to be Shiki's rival. So hey, maybe this is Marco's dad, or older brother, or something, who knows. Maybe Marco's biological family was actually on Roger's crew, and this is why Shanks wants him on the Red Hair Pirates so bad. On the topic of the devil fruits, Kaido just mugging the dragon fruit from Big Mom was definitely not how I expected things to go down, even though the way this scene was drawn is hilarious. Big Mom thinks that Kaido owes her big for what happened here, but honestly, I would call this sequence of events a crutch rather than a debt, but I guess logic was never Lin's strong suit. Big Mom's thinking of giving the dragon fruit to Katakuri, I think shows that she always just favored her most useful children, or in this case, her strongest children, where she didn't plan on giving the fruit to Perospero or Compote, even though they're both older than Katakuri. Or perhaps, Big Mom just had a sick sense of humor, and she wanted to give the fish fruit to Katakuri as a jab at his teeth. She's certainly not above ridiculing her kids over their looks. It is also pretty funny that Luffy ended up having his biggest fights in the story, against both Katakuri and Kaido, though I'm pretty sure that Luffy's journey would have ended in Totland, if Katakuri at this point had had the dragon fruit instead of the mochi fruit. I'm also certain that this is a what-if scenario a lot of channels are already clamoring to make videos out of, including yours truly. This chapter also reiterates that even when Big Mom was under rocks, her true goal was always just to use Xebec as a stepping stone and to herself become the ruler of the seas in the future. If I were a desperate man, I would use Big Mom's words here as further evidence that the Big Mom pirates will come back stronger than ever later in this arc. But really, do I actually need to argue something that is so obvious to happen? I really like the fact that Garp in this chapter pretty much just repeats Smoker's words from the end of Marineford, believing that the Marines were no longer fighting on the side of justice. I already went through a bunch of ideas of what this might mean for Garp's character earlier in this video, but I think this scene paralleling Smoker is also just the story setting us up for a huge Marine revolt happening in the final saga. At this point, the story has basically made sure to show how conflicted the Marines are in almost every scene where we see the Celestial Dragons doing evil stuff. I can only hope that this also means that Akainu is going to turn on his bosses and to try to forge his own world order. But if you're interested, you can click here to watch a whole video I made about this and what role Akainu may actually serve in the final war. One final big thing I have to say about this chapter is that while Shiki may be the biggest Shaggy simp around, at least it's a healthier form of being a simp, as even when he's in Rayleigh's arms, Shiki prioritizes Shaggy's well-being over getting her affection. Putting jokes aside for a bit, Shiki being this fixated on Shaggy is honestly pretty consistent with the kind of person he has always been shown to be. Shiki is just a really passionate guy, where chapter 0 is basically just the story of him being obsessed with Roger. I do wonder if this flashback will touch on this, where maybe Shiki's fixation on Roger had its origin on God Valley. It's really no wonder that Shaggy allows Rayleigh to sleep with other women. Just looking at Shaggy's face here, if she wasn't already infatuated with him before, Rayleigh rescuing Shaggy probably gave him credit for years of polyamory. I do however wonder what Rayleigh planned on telling Shaggy. I'll write my own take in the comments, because I don't want to upset the YouTube algorithm. The Yamato cover story kind of just ends in this chapter without us learning anything new, other than that Kinemon is understandably suspicious of Ulti. I was expecting Yamato to announce the creation of the Yamato Pirates, but the manga apparently still wants to milk the Yamato 4 Straw Hat talking point a bit more. The theme of this cover story was most definitely food, since Yamato pretty much ate from its beginning all the way to the end, which I guess is all just to show that Wano finally got their agriculture sorted out with no more Kaido around stealing their stuff. I suppose this means that we're now in for months of fan request cover pages, until we eventually shift to the next cover story, which I'm almost certain will involve the Vegapunks after the events of the Egghead arc. This Elbaf flashback also made me wonder if we might genuinely get cover stories in the future that are entirely focused on things that happened years ago in the past. Like for example, a cover story of what Shiki did in the decades after Chapter 0. There really is no shortage of these kinds of stories to tell in the One Piece world. I just genuinely hope Oda takes care of his sleep and exercise, so that he can keep writing this manga exactly the way he likes for years to come. Even if he doesn't though, I'm personally at least more than satisfied with what we already have. Garling getting such a bad beatdown from Xebec in this chapter may have made a lot of fans think that Shanks' stand won't actually be a huge threat in the final saga, but I think these fans should reconsider. I honestly think that Garling got insanely more powerful after God Valley, but you can actually click here to watch a full video about this, where I go over why it was likely Garling, not Loki, who not only killed Harald, but also stole Elbaf's legendary devil fruit, and that Garling this very day is the current user of this fruit. Big thanks to all my members for their bounty. Even if you're not a member though, props to you for watching this video to the end. Have a nice one.